We talk a lot about fixing what's broken in this job, but sometimes the most powerful thing you can do as a leader is just to see what's already going on right. Know Your Force is a simple system that sends a quick text survey to the people you interact with. It's helping leaders see the good their teams are already doing, back their people with real data, and step in before stress turns into burnout. Learn more at knowyourforce.com. Are you looking for help with your rest and recovery, wanting to optimize your sleep and prime performance? Well, New Calm is built on neuroscience, and it's been used by special operators, SportTac, pro sports teams, and many, many more for years. To learn more and access the best deals of the year, go to newcalm.co/grit. That's Newcalm, NUCALM.co/grit. The views and opinions expressed by the host and guests of this show do not represent their employing agency, department, or organization. All information should be regarded as anecdotal, contextual, and educational, and should not be misinterpreted as legal or medical advice. Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode. Today I'm joined by prior guest, Brian Willard. Brian's a current police officer. He's joined us in episode 269 about FTOs, field training officers. So that's an extremely popular episode, of course, because people love talking about training and people love talking about it from both ends. They like talking about what to expect when you're coming in, when you're newer. They like to talk about what's been working, what hasn't been working. How do we set up the next generation well from the other end, from the experienced end. Today, we're going to be talking about a different type of topic, and that is mental health, mental wellness, self-harm, and suicide. And that's something very, very near and dear to Brian. And so I'm going to ask Brian to say hello, do a little introduction for those that haven't listened, but do go back to episode 269 because this is critical. And just like the critical nature of training and being safe, we need to recognize the other end, the prevalent end of safety and officer safety, which is how do we take care of ourselves and how do we take care of our own? And so without further, Brian, welcome back. Thanks for joining me, man.
Thank you for having me again. Very excited to be here.
Absolutely. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, like a Cliff Notes version of you? And we'll go from there. And I do want to ask you about your story, your personal connection to this topic.
Yeah. So, police officer here in the Pacific Northwest, been a police officer now going on 2 decades. It's, had a variety of different job titles over the years. But more recently, I've been involved in our hostage or crisis negotiation team as an attachment to our tactical team. So I've been doing that. But yeah, law enforcement, 20 years and still loving every minute of it.
Yeah. Congrats. Thanks. And I'm just going to embarrass you. Negotiator of the year. What? You're not going to talk about that?
Yes. Negotiator of the year. Yeah, no, I was humbled or humbly accepted the award, got Negotiator of the Year for my team for a couple of incidents that took place back in 2025. And it was a cool honor, especially given the caliber of people that are on my team. Very humbled by it, but it was pretty cool.
Yeah, that says a lot. And those roles are so critical. Man, we might need to have you back for a negotiator episode. I talked about that with other negotiators before about having a little panel because these are skills, capabilities, talents that they translate through and they transcend, really all human connection, but for sure, any role you have in service, any role you have in first responder work. So hats off to you, man.
Thank you. Yeah. How to communicate to people, right? How to understand people is key. So for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So that's frequently a time that people are in crisis when you're activated in that role. A lot of times it's called hostage negotiation. A lot of times these days it's called more broadly like crisis negotiation or responder. Can you tell us about, as you told me, 10 years this year, the tragedy that happened?
Yeah. So, and find out or figure out where it all started, I mean, you'd have to go back maybe another 13 years back. But, in 2016, I come from a pretty big family of law enforcement, from my great grandfather on down, aunts and uncles, great grandfather, grandfather, and me and my brother and cousins in the family. Kind of, we'll call it the family business, I guess, if you will. But back in 2016, after my brother had some struggles with his career and some other things that kind of led him down a path to ultimately losing his job, um, back in 2016, he took his own life. As a result of some things that happened within his career, but also some things that kind of happened outside. It was a culmination of those things that ultimately led him to that path. But yeah, things that happened in his career absolutely had an impact on his mental health later on, uh, down the road, later on down in life.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And we talk about that a lot here. We recognize there's the on duty stress, there's the off duty stress, and they are extremely intertwined and overlapping. And as one gets worse, generally the other one gets worse. And so they're both they're like two sinking ships that just collided. Um, in retrospect, you talk about kind of looking back as far as like the struggles, and are there things that you think about frequently as far as like your teams, your culture, or like our profession, and in detection or in buddy checks, in these things we talk about, because you do hear a lot of that, but I think it's really intangible for people until after the fact sometimes, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think we have to go back to a time when Andy started his career and kind of the mentality in law enforcement at that time. This was in early 2002 is when he got hired. And, prior to us becoming police officers ourselves, we were surrounded by it. So again, my family was in it. My brother and I were both explorers with an agency down here. And so we were around the culture all the time. And, back then, so we're talking maybe early 90s or late 90s into early 2000s. So back then, the mindset was always, well, we hire you to do this job. There's stress associated with this job. It's why we send you through all of these checks, background and psychological evaluations to make sure that you can handle those stress. And so there was always this mentality of like, well, I'm supposed to be able to handle these types of things. These types of things shouldn't affect me. When the reality is that was not true at all, right? But we had in law enforcement a culture where being vulnerable to those types of things was kind of frowned upon, right? Or,
Hmm.
you got some grief, or you got some crap from your buddies when you expressed any type of feeling in that way. And so I'll say this: that I think our culture mindset has changed from then until now, and I think we are definitely moving in the right direction. But at the time, early 2000s, kind of the thing that kicked this off for Andy was, and that's my brother, was he was involved in an OIS, right? And he was
Hmm.
early in his career. He was young in his career. Without going into a ton of the detail, essentially what it was a subject who attempted to abduct a 17-year-old parcel clerk from a local grocery store. And in the time between that event taking place and the time that Andy ultimately stopped the vehicle via a traffic stop, the suspect had gone and purchased a firearm, presumably with the plan of going back and attempting this again, this time being armed.
Hmm.
And Annie intervened in that in a traffic stop. And during the traffic stop, the subject exited the vehicle armed with that gun, and the OIS took place. But at the time, for Andy, again, very young in his career, but he also had a very young family. His firstborn daughter was 2 years old at the time. And so the, we try to prepare ourselves for what the impact is going to be, or we understand that we might have to use a deadly force deadly force in those types of encounters. But it impacted him more, I think, given the fact that he had a young family, the potential of him being seriously injured or killed in that scenario hit home for him.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of that, in culmination with the fact that we had this mindset of you're supposed to be able to handle these things. And so talking about how it impacted you, all of that got pushed down for him. And that was really the genesis of that led him ultimately to the path of taking his own life. There was a ton of other stuff that took place in between that, but that is where this started.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna go back a little bit. You point out that old culture that you were very much brought up around, and you were in a policing family, and so you saw that. And even if you're talking about it in the '90s or like the early 2000s, even if people weren't really part of that or they weren't really alongside that, they can still see a lot of remnants of that, and we can still see. I do agree with you that it's changed and it's changing, and maybe that's a better verb for me. Is like changing means we're not done, right? We're still evolving, and I even want to say that. Like I want to point out how it is the direction we need to go in, because change sometimes isn't good, but the way it's going is a higher understanding, a higher compassion, recognizing that an apple is not an apple. There's all these different factors that's going to play into how someone is navigating the stress of the job, the stress of life, and how they process these things or how they don't process these things, how they cope, how they don't cope, healthy, unhealthy. And I do recognize, like from my time coming on and still seeing remnants of it, whether it's in my region or outside, or whether it's in social media where it's clearly cops talking and bashing other cops. It's just so frustrating when these are lives, and we talk so much about officer safety. We put it on this pedestal, and the culture I came into, I don't know if it was for you, but it was like number one rule: you go home, right? You go home at the end of the day. And then there was a development where it's like, wait, officer safety isn't actually paramount. The victim and the hostages. Well, that makes sense, right? Like priorities of life. So you kind of reaffirm that. But we're number two, or scratch that, bystanders. We're number three. And so because we obviously do put the public ahead of ourselves, and suspects go below us, because we shouldn't sacrifice that. But all that said, we're talking about tactics, we're talking about training, how we walked into this episode. Like preach, preach, preach. We'll call each other out for these little things that might end up being a unsafe officer situation, whether it's our equipment management or our tactics, what have you, which is great. We need to call people out with compassion and directness for safety. Why are we at such an impasse or such a discord when we talk about how we interact with each other, how we show up for each other? Whether we actually treat each other like a brother and sister in the profession. And I'm not trying to go like the family direction. I'm just trying to go like human beings, or we just throw mud and slander and all this. And you're nodding and kind of smirking. So I'm going to put a pin in that for now. And I want to see your thoughts there.
Yeah. It's, having us saying, hey, you're my brother, you're my sister. We're talking about that in the context of the career that we do, right? Because it is a career that very few do, but even more importantly, it's a career that very few people understand.
Right.
The things that we go through as law enforcement officers, if the general public had even an iota of understanding of what that was, they'd be in shock, right? Because in their world, they're protected and they don't see the things mostly because of us, right? And not to put us on that pedestal, but that's the reality, right? That we're sheepdogs for a reason. Now, what I find, one of the things that you mentioned that I found pretty interesting was we are almost the first to eat our own, right?
Yeah.
We have a culture where calling people out professionally and respectfully, that comes from a place of wanting to be better at what we do, right? You see that a lot in HNT. You see that a lot on tactical teams where they're the first to go, yep, I made a mistake. Here's how we can learn, and here's how we can do better next time. But when people are going through things and that's affecting their career, all of a sudden this becomes an isolation. We start to isolate people. And I don't know the why behind that. I don't understand the why behind that, because it's like we all go through the same type of things to varying degrees. We, if put in that situation, would not want to be treated that way. Why is our first inclination to treat other people that way? And I don't even know if that's a conscious decision. Maybe it's just a subconscious.
Yeah, it's probably
that's
both
happening.
and every mix of, like, I'm not a psychologist. I am fascinated by it more and more, but it probably goes to human nature, right? What are most people's motivators at the core? It's self-promotion or self-preservation, protection. And so if I sense weakness, look at that person so you don't have to look at me. And then
Right.
there's a bleed over to the shadow. Like I see insecurity in that person, or I'm going to call it out because I feel it in me and I don't want to acknowledge that. And so it's not to keep pointing fingers, but it is like recognize, as you said, like how we eat our own. And I might have said this on recording before, but definitely in conversation, where I'd even argue that we are worse to each other than suspects. And that might send some people for a loop. But what I mean by that in at first glance is like I've been called a lot of things by suspects. I've been a lot of racial things, a lot of crude things, a lot of really like, hey, I'm gonna find your family, like, really personal things. But it wasn't personal because they don't know me. Like, they don't know crap about me. They're just trying to get under my skin, or they're playing the game that, the hat that they're wearing in the society and my hat I'm wearing in society. But our colleagues, they know us personally. And the stuff that is said in the hallways, sometimes by peer support people, sometimes by these wellness advocates. And I'm not saying I'm holier than thou. I'm saying I feel bad for times that I participate in gossiping, and I try to catch myself, things like that. But just the corrosive nature, I'm just at this point where when we're talking about our people's lives, I'm just losing all sense of patience for these simpler things that we can do, which goes as simple as like, just be nice to each other. Just don't be an a-hole.
Yeah, one of the things that we have at our my agency is, these tenets of, be good at what you do. And it ends with take care of one another, take care of each other. And you're right. I'm trying to remember here. You had said something, and it sparked a thought in my head, and then it all of a sudden just went away. So you had mentioned earlier that, how we get treated by suspects is less personal to us because, to your point, they don't know who we are.
Yeah.
Right. But when we're talking about people that understand us, or people who know us, that tends to cut a little bit more. And even in peer support, I've seen this where people who have gone through special training, people who have, read an oath to help peers when they're in these struggles, even they participate in some of this, talking behind your back type of stuff. And so that starts to pull trust away, right? Because if
sure.
I'm sitting there and I'm listening to this group of people do what we do best, talk smack about each other, right? 90% of the time it's in good humor and good fun. But now when I'm seeing that take place, when something is going bad for another person, and I see somebody who I know is there to support us when things are going bad for us, they're engaging in the same behavior. Does that erode the trust that I'm going to have in them if I ever find myself in that situation?
From interviews to jail calls, Ditto Transcripts delivers fast, confidential, and court-ready transcription for law enforcement agencies. Ditto is CJIS compliant and is already working with agencies all over the U.S., including the Washington State Patrol and the National Park Service Investigations Unit. Get started now at dittotranscripts.com. That's dittotranscripts.com. To hear details about all the applications of Ditto Transcripts and exactly why this is a key solution for your organization's workload issues, check out episode 232. Law enforcement and government agencies struggle with parking citations, often because no one will pay them. Boots or other devices are costly, and they invite confrontation when implied and later removed by enforcing employees. With Tire Tag, you can avoid many hurdles and ultimately promote public safety and revenue collection. To learn more, visit tiretag.com. For a thorough conversation on how Tire Tag can help your agency and revenue collection, visit episode 204. That's 204.
Yeah, absolutely. You see it. That's why that's why building it is so critical that it's done right. And I've had people reach out from different agencies, different states about peer support, and I've heard uh, I've heard the sentiment that they're nervous to build it because they don't trust their culture with it, which I totally get it. I'm like, then slow down. Like, good on you for pumping the brakes. And there's other ways to do it, and I hope that no one comes out of this like, well, shoot, peer support is better than or worse than not having it. It's not that. It needs to be done right. It needs to be done mindfully, picking your people. And there are ways to hack it where, you can use smaller departments. You can partner with other agencies. So you do have this anonymity. Um, Locally, there's Code 4 Northwest. And so I can just say, hey, my name is Eddie. It's not, if you haven't been following the show. I just want to talk to you about some stuff. Whether it's, my boss sucks, or, my kids won't listen to me, or I am using substance and I'm kind of scared. Like, whatever the thing is, like, there's somebody that never gets to know who I am, doesn't see my face, if that's what I want. And I love that there are opportunities for that. Copline is a national one. And so I hope people don't feel hamstrung, like they don't have people to reach out to. And I hope that those listening, if they're feeling good now, like you feel like you're plugged in, then you keep that in your Rolodex for maybe you one day, or for your circles when someone just seems a little off, because your partners, your buddies, when they seem a little off, just show you care, right? Like, hey, are you good? You just seem a little different. You're not your normal self. I just want to check. I care about you. Like, and if it feels awkward, that's okay. But I would always venture to push yourself out of your comfort zone and make that contact, as we call it, or check in. And that can look a lot of different ways.
I agree that that's important, but I think there's the other side to that coin is where we really need to start switching our mentality. And that is being willing to accept that help when you need it, right?
Yeah.
Again, the job that we do, I always say this, what is our job? Our job is professional problem solvers. That's what, when you distill it down to a thing, that's what we go do.
Mm-hmm.
And we are the ones, when we get into a scenario that we're comfortable taking command of a situation, we're comfortable taking control of a dynamic, intense situation, because that's the job that we do. And you do this long enough, the game starts to slow down for you. And I'll share a little personal story, and I think this kind of ties back to what we're talking about here. And that is, about 2 years ago, I had a little procedure done on my hand where they'd gone in and it was surgical, and I got 2 stitches for it. And I go, 2 weeks later when it's done, to get those stitches removed, and not afraid to admit this, but as the doctor is removing the stitches, I passed out. I lost consciousness for a short period of time. And when I woke up, the doctor and I are having a conversation, and he says, let me guess. You're either a firefighter or a police officer.
Mm.
And I was like,
Wow.
well, okay, that's magical. How did you know that? And he's like, firefighters and police officers are used to going into a situation where they have control. And when that control is taken from them, they don't like it. You don't like it. Your brain doesn't like it. Your mentality doesn't like it. And so that's the same kind of concept when we're used to going and helping people who are vulnerable. We do not like the feeling when we're the one who is vulnerable. And so our response, if I come to you and I go, hey man, I just noticed some things are off, want to make sure you're okay. Your first inclination is going to be, yeah, I'm good. I'm fine, right? Because we don't like the feeling of vulnerability. And now I'm putting you in a position that is going to make you feel vulnerable. And we don't like that. And so getting back to my point there, it's like we have to have the mindset in our head that it's okay. This job sucks sometimes. And we go and deal with a bunch of bad things sometimes. And to believe that that's not going to have an impact on our mental health or our mentality is just, I don't want to be too harsh and say ignorant, but that's what it is, right? It's going to, you're human, regardless of all of the things that you've gone through and the training that you've gone through and the psychological evaluations you've done. At the end of the day, you're human, and you can't sidestep the fact that we all still experience things like this. And it's okay to do that. And so I think having the shift in mentality, yes, it's important for us to be able to be comfortable with going to somebody that we care about and go, hey, I noticed something's off, and are you okay? I think even bigger, the shift should be, we need to be able to admit when we're struggling. And that was the big thing that Andy had a problem with. And we can take a deep dive into that. Some telltale signs that, in hindsight were there, but I think that's where our shift needs to happen, is our own willingness to be able to go, yeah, something's not right.
Yeah, I really appreciate that insight and that angle. I'm glad we went there, because we can say all this, like I started with, like, hey, like, how do we check in on the other side, right? Like, when I'm regulated, when I'm balanced, when I'm like plugged in. But I've had my low points, I've had my frustrating points, I've had my, um, I don't know, like, this book I'm reading, it's depth psychology, but it kind of highlights how depression is stigmatized, but also it's like a categorical diagnosis. And I've told people I felt in a depressed state. And I've relayed that. And one word that he throws out that was used pretty old school was melancholy. Like, back in the oldie times, like, people would talk about their state of melancholy. And I'm like, yeah, I think that hits it, right? And I think that's something that would resonate with a lot of people in this type of work, where you're just in a lot of sucky situations. You see a lot of hurt, a lot of damage. You're worried about your buddies, you're worried about your family, you're worried about yourself, and you're just in this low state. For me, there were never thoughts of self-harm, but I was not doing great. I was not dialed in. I was not attentive. I was not present with my family. I wasn't. I was distracted at work. That's not great. When work stress and life stress is leading you to go into autopilot driving around the city, that's not good. You should be like hyper vigilant, right? Highly aware in that yellow. But I was kind of like, just super distracted, right? So I just want to give permission for people to think about it in those contexts. And I love how you outlined that, which is normalizing and being comfortable with accepting help. And I think you're accurate when you tie it to this loss of control. And we do feel like we're in control a lot, but I say that on purpose. We feel like it. And control is so often an illusion, right? I can show up to a call with all my gear and my training. And yes, I am confident that I can handle a lot of what comes through that door, but I'd be naive to think I could handle it all. You give me another buddy, okay, I feel much, much better. You give me 4, you give me a sergeant, you give me a TAC team, yes, an HNT and a drone, then now I'm feeling like just about anything, but not everything, like, we can manage with planning, trust, communication, right? So I think that, with that metaphor, one way to look at it, and we can socialize this, anyone listening here, and you and I with our circles can socialize this idea of like partnering or like a co-pilot, because I've engaged a therapist before, and I did not just like hand over the keys to my life and my way of thinking. We didn't use this terminology, but I want to use it now, which is that let someone sit in the passenger seat. You can still drive the car. It's your life, right? Like, you should still drive the car, but just like a two person patrol car, just like your awesome phase 4 FTO student, where you're in the passenger seat, you're basically operating like partners. Like, let someone be that for you. Let them come along with you. Let them be your partner. Let them be your co-pilot. What are your thoughts on that?
We on our SWAT team, the hostage negotiation team is tasked with driving all of our pieces of armor. And there is a reason that we assign a driver and a navigator to each piece of armor that we use. And so just to tack on to that metaphor that you have given is, yes, it's okay to have somebody there that can kind of guide you. You're still driving, you're still inputting the steering, you're still applying the brakes and the gas, but you've got somebody there that has got a different perspective, different angle, can see things differently, and can take on, I don't want to say take on some of the tasks that, you would have to do, but again, just have the ability to absorb some of those things, or point out some of those things that they're seeing, that you may not be even, crossing your mind, that are happening.
Yeah.
I don't know. When I was in college, I one of the psychology classes that I took, they talked about the concept of the Johari window, and that is just, if you think of a pane of glass, there's 4 components to that. There are things about us that we are aware of and other people are aware of. There are things about us that we're aware of, but other people don't know about us. There are things that other people know and we're completely unaware of. And then there are things that we're both unaware of, right? About me. And sometimes we need somebody who is aware of the things about us that we are completely unaware of, to point those things out, and somebody that we trust enough where when they do that, we know that they're going to do that in a way that is intentional and it comes from a good place. But it's also somebody that we're going to trust and be able to take that feedback and apply it, making an assumption that we possess the emotional intelligence to be able to take that kind of feedback and apply it to our lives. But yeah, I love that metaphor.
Yeah, just to riff on that, and then we can tie it back to, and I have a plan to connect it back to talking about the signs in retrospect to your brother, Andy. But yeah, that's fantastic. I can't remember who taught me about the Johari window. It might have been you, but on that, it makes me think of accountability buddies, right? Like, and having that designee. And if you think about any dialed in high performer, whether it's in work or a team or a relationship, like you have that self check, that other check, the buddy check, right? You have that person guiding you, offering that, devil's advocacy, kind of being that coach, mentor, someone on the side to give you objective view. And it's part of what I train when we talk about wellness or leadership. Like, find those people you trust and make it part of your routine to check in with them and say, like, hey, am I on track here? Right? It's almost like proofreading a long email, right? Like, hey, am I coming off a certain way? Like, just give me your feedback. And you're talking about that. And like, so anytime you want to be effective, everyone realizes the power of a coach, of a teacher, of a mentor. However, that's when we're operating really, really, really well. And so how do we account for when we're not operating really, really, really well, when just doing the basics are hard? And I think it is building those routines and those, I call them guardrails a lot of times, building those into your practice, into your ritual of how you exist, so that when that slides off, it happens. Like, I've invited some of my closest friends years and years ago to call me out if I start going cynical, like I did when I was 1.5, 2 years in, because they did call me out back then. They told me I was an asshole. I got defensive, but they were right. I was wrong. It took some pondering on it, some marinating on it, and I was like, yes, like this, how I'm looking at the world is not serving me, and it's not factually true.
All right, that was part 1 of this 2-part interview. Make sure to tune in next time to hear the rest of the tips and insight from our conversation. Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.